A new study has found recently that nearly 1 in 4 heart and stroke deaths in Canada are linked to ultra-processed foods. That is a staggering number, but worse than that is the fact most of us don't even realise how much of this stuff we're eating every day. In this video, I'm going to reveal the 5 worst ultra-processed foods you should cut back on today, and some of them might very well surprise you. But before we get into the list, I think we all need a bit of a reality check on just how bad ultra-processed food really is. Hello folks, this is Grocery Dad. Now, this study was conducted by the University of Montreal and it used a model developed originally by a Brazilian research team. I've linked the full research paper in the description if you're interested. But the shocking headlines are that ultra-processed food has been linked to nearly 20,000 deaths in Canada alone. Now, I'm not a doctor, nor am I a nutritionist, and I have to confess, I was not really up to speed with ultra-processed food until quite recently. So you two have probably heard the term before, but if you're anything like I was, you haven't really kind of stopped to think much about what ultra-processed actually means. Or if you have, maybe you've dismissed it because you think it doesn't really apply to what you eat. Now, honestly, that's kind of what I tended to think. I thought it was the junk food that other people were eating. And I have to say, I was very, very wrong indeed. So this is a quick way to break down the 3 major types of products that you're going to find at your local grocery store. The first is whole foods. Now, whole foods are pretty simple. They are as close to nature as you can possibly get. Think fresh fruit, vegetables, eggs, fish. Pretty simple. If it looks like something that grew on a farm or grew in a field, it's whole food. Processed foods. These are the next group. And they've been altered a little bit, maybe like by being put in a can, for example. So things like canned beans, canned veg, and salted nuts. If it still resembles something you recognize as a whole food, then chances are it's just processed rather than ultra-processed. And so ultra-processed foods, therefore, are at the entirely opposite end of the spectrum. And they either don't have any whole food left in them at all, or it's just so far removed from its original state that you can't actually tell what it started life as. Most of what's in them has either been extracted from food or, better still, cooked up in a lab. And for various reasons, chief among them being to stop the stuff going manky on the shelf and to make it sort of taste vaguely like something you resemble as being real food, food companies have to pump in things like stabilizers and emulsifiers and flavour enhancers. Now, sometimes these products are referred to as fake food, other times food-based products, and my personal favourite, industrially produced edible substances. And that, ladies and gentlemen, should give you a pretty clear indication of what you're dealing with here, because it really isn't food, at least not in the traditional sense that we would probably tend to recognise. And that should get a few alarm bells ringing. Now, as the Canadian study I mentioned at the top has found, along with many, many other studies conducted over the years, ultra-processed foods are f***ing you up. Okay? It's really not a question of if, it's a question of how much. By eating lots of this stuff, you are significantly increasing your risk of a whole range of things like obesity, diabetes, heart attack, high blood pressure, stroke, dementia, and cancer. So, given just how bad this stuff is for us, then why the hell don't we all just stop eating it? Well, you see, it really isn't as easy as all that, and the global food giants have invested billions of dollars making sure of it. You see, ultra-processed foods are designed not only to be convenient and cheap and tasty, but in fact, the way they taste is really important because they've been designed specifically to make you eat more than you need. You're not just being a pig, you're actually being manipulated by the food industry. And I used to fall into this trap all the time because, like many people, my wife and I are trying to juggle work and family and, everything else in between. So grabbing a quick frozen meal or a snack bar or something out of a packet felt like, a nice easy option, something that wasn't going to do us too much harm. And for a long time, I didn't think much about it at all. But I hit a turning point back in 2016. That was the year that my dad died of cancer. Now, I will never know the extent to which his diet contributed to his illness, but I do know some of his food choices might not have been the best. And that was enough for me to stop and really to start thinking about what I was putting in my body. And once I started paying a bit more attention, I realised just how many ultra-processed foods I was eating, often without even noticing. And that's when I started cutting down and ultimately cutting out certain things altogether. And trust me, these next 5 foods I'm going to share with you, they are some of the worst. Now, before we get to the list, I want to give you guys some idea of the criteria for what makes a product truly awful. Firstly, they're high in additives and preservatives. As a rule of thumb, if it's got ingredients in it you can't pronounce or you have no idea what purpose they serve, that is a red flag. And it's very easy to be complacent about this stuff, right? Tiny quantities, and all the food agencies have told us they're safe, and you probably are not going to drop down dead half an hour after you've eaten something that's got xanthan gum in it, for example. But I do encourage you to dig a bit deeper into the literature on these substances, because the compounding effect they may be having on your gut and on the systems of your body in general will shock you. Second thing about them is they are very, very low in nutrients, meaning there really isn't anything in the way of goodness that your body is taking from these ultra-processed foods. You're getting calories, and that is basically it. No health benefits, nothing that's going to make your body feel good in any way at all. And the kicker, remember, is most of these foods have been formulated in such a way that you're not going to feel full after you eat them in the same way you would after eating proper real food, let's say a steak and some veg. So your body is literally being tricked into wanting more of something that is not doing it any good whatsoever. So then, of course, there's the obvious links to serious health risks. I mentioned these before, and they range from heart disease through to diabetes. So more than just unhealthy, ultra-processed foods are outright dangerous over time. All right then, so that being said, what are these 5 mega bad ultra-processed products? Well, at number 5, we have something that might surprise a lot of you, because bread seems like such a basic thing, right? But most store-bought bread is very far from being natural. Many of the brands out there are packed with preservatives, emulsifiers, and even, of course, added sugar. Some breads barely have any fibre in them, and the end result is they spike your blood sugar just like junk food. Wholemeal varieties are probably the ones you ought to be looking for, but broadly speaking, the less of it you eat, the better. At number 4, if you think of soup as a healthy meal, you're definitely not wrong, but the powdered soup mixes you can buy, well, that's a different story. These again are packed full of goodies like artificial flavours and sometimes MSG, which is something your body can generally do without. Now they trick you into thinking you're eating, some kind of homemade delight. But unless grandma's got a chemistry degree, she is not making soup like this in the kitchen back home. And of course, ultimately, as far as nutrition goes, these powders are basically empty. Number 3 then, I know cereal is one of those childhood favourites, but if you're still starting your day with a big bowl of this stuff, you definitely want to rethink the quantity, the frequency, or both. You see, for one thing, they are still loaded with a lot of sugar. In fact, some have as much sugar per serving as a dessert. So again, your blood sugar gets this massive spike and then a huge dip afterwards. And then there's the artificial colours and flavours. And by the way, if you do see natural flavour somewhere written on there, that doesn't mean what you think it means. So look that up if you've been under the assumption that natural flavours somehow makes these products more real and better for you. And something else that I only really cottoned on to recently, that's all these on-pack claims. You know, when it says high in fibre or high in protein, well, you only get those on ultra-processed foods because they're basically trying to sell them to you as being healthy and good for you. But the truth is they're putting synthetic versions of those things back into the product, knowing that without them, they're basically just slurry. At number 2, this next one is a big problem because it's often seen as a good source of protein, but in reality, heavily processed meats are one of the most dangerous foods that are out there. They contain things like nitrates and nitrites, which have been linked many times over to various different cancers, and they're often full of all sorts of other weird and wonderful things that will mess you up if you eat them often and regularly. So, nothing wrong with a sausage from time to time, but stick, if at all possible, to the best quality products and the shortest ingredients lists that you can afford. And finally, the number 1 on the list, the worst ultra-processed food, might again actually shock you, and it's another one that a lot of people buy thinking it's a healthy choice, and that is flavoured yogurt. I've talked about this one in other videos before, but typically flavoured yogurt has a ton of sugar in it, similar in amount to what you get in candy, and all of those artificial flavours and stabilisers and preservatives come rearing their heads yet again. Typically too, they've never come into contact with a strawberry or a raspberry or an apricot or any other kind of real whole food. It's all just an illusion based on pretty pictures and ads full of healthy looking people. Every time I see these things, and this is absolutely true folks, on the shelf at the grocery store, I'm genuinely tempted to buy them because they do look delicious. And then I stop and I remind myself that I can make something nicer and better for my kids at home. I just mix natural yogurt, some peanut butter, a little bit of cinnamon, little drizzle of honey, and it's probably 1/10 of the cost as well. So there you have it folks, 5 of the worst ultra processed foods that sneak into our diets. Now, I dropped in a few alternatives during that rundown, but here's a few more little ideas, I guess, that I try and stick to just to keep some of that ultra processed stuff out of my cart. And first and foremost, the most important thing to remember here, I think, is you don't have to cut everything out overnight. The truth is, every small little change you make is going to help, and it'll all add up to a big difference in the long run. And beyond that, start by choosing some different things. Things like whole grain bread, like I mentioned before, or homemade soup, or plain Greek yogurt. Just mix it up like I mentioned, or try putting some fresh fruit on instead of buying the flavoured ones. Then if the ingredient list is long and full of things you can't pronounce and things aren't in the cupboard, then just put it back. Don't even buy it, just put it back on the shelf. The next thing to try and get into the habit of is batch cooking. Now, even if this is to begin with just once a week, it's gonna help you to reduce your reliance on those convenience foods, and that will in turn lower your intake of ultra processed as well. And finally, for snacks, especially for kids' lunches, instead of things that come packaged, try things like nuts when you're allowed to, or fruit, or even homemade energy balls and homemade muffins. Now, I'm not a strong baker, guys, and yet at the weekend I made a tray of these little banana mini muffins for the children, and they were gone before lunch. So if I can do it, I assure you, you can too. Okay, so now that you've seen what I think the worst offenders are, I want to hear from you. Okay, which one of these do you eat the most? Drop in a comment below, let me know what you think about the whole subject of ultra processed and what you're doing, if anything, to try and cut down. Above all though, I'll come back to my own experience here. Remember, no one needs to be perfect with this, whatever perfect is. You don't have to cut all these products out of your diet 100% from tomorrow. And in fact, as this list of products shows, it's probably hard to do that because they're so damn prevalent anyway. So don't try and do that, but do start just cutting back little by little here and there, just making 1 or 2 small changes each week. And it will, little by little, start to make a big difference, not only to your health, guys, but also actually to your wallet and the amount of money you're spending on food too. Have you found this helpful? Please tap that like button and tap subscribe for more grocery tips. And if you are serious about making some better food choices, then do check out some of my other videos on products to swap out of and healthy shopping tips to switch into. Thanks very much for being here. See you next time. Take care.